already sending hearts, which is fantastic. Again, most of you have already said this, but if you haven't yet, I'll give you a minute or two just to say, oh, look, Malaga. If you can say where you came from, or if you're online, where are you currently? Are you on a transatlantic flight? Are you in the Philippines? Are you, well, maybe that's wishful thinking, but hopefully, I think everyone's already answered. So I'll just skip to the next one. Yesterday we had our first member of the public join us, which is great. I'm pretty sure that the distribution won't change too much, but 62 people have answered this already, so if you haven't yet, please do. 63, that's one more. 64, excellent. So I'll give you one more minute. So, as always, for everyone joining online, you can interact with us in the chat underneath the YouTube video or on Twitter, and that's true for everyone in the room as well. So use hashtag SARCC event. We have Isaac and Will who will be retweeting, answering your questions, and then making sure your questions get asked in the room as well. So do interact with us. And I just thought I'll wake everyone up and ask you, what's your superpower? And you can say literally anything. You can say things that you would like to have as a superpower. There you go. Eating too much. I'm not sure if that's a superpower, but there we go. It's definitely something we've all been subject to, I think. Yeah. It sounds like a typical Interact conference. Water management, nice, that's on topic, that's very good. Dressmaking, that's very exciting. I wonder who the ginger superpower is in the room. Brilliant, so that's just a little bit of fun to wake everyone up at the start of the day. I know it's getting to the end of the week, so just thought we'd do that. Great, just like yesterday, throughout the presentations, you can answer or you can ask your questions using Mentimeter. If you just keep your Mentimeter open, and that's true for everyone online and in person, if you just pop your questions in, and then we will now move over to our first speaker. That will be Gary Momber. We've already heard from Gary, but he was talking more about the engagement side of things, whereas now he's going to talk about how the Longdura has been used to assess the SARCC pilots and how it can help us plan future ones more effectively. So over to you, Gary.
Thank you, David. Good morning, everyone. Luckily, I'm 5 minutes early today. 2 days ago, I did talk about engagement, but the presentation, the session we had was a lot about engagement with the Discovery Bus tour and also the visualization tool. But I also gave you a bunch of context there, which is probably over and above what I should have done, and I did it rather quickly. Today, I'm going to dig back into some of that context, because I needed to present the context really to justify all these outreach activities we did. But today I'm going to just dig back into some of that context to just explain a bit about the Maritime Atlas, at which we generated for the Word Package 1, and also just to see how we took that data and how we analysed that data. Quite briefly, hopefully. So, as part of the talk, we'll be looking at why is long-term coastal change relevant? What data can we use to help understand coastal change, which will be going back through the data I described on Tuesday, and then looking how we assess the data and we validate the data sets. And I'll finish with the contribution, how it contributes to spatial planning as part of the W1, WP1 outputs. So, why is long-term coastal change relevant? Well, I did have a few slides to describe this, but really we're all pretty well informed here. And we know why it's relevant. We've been talking about it for the last 2 days. And effectively, the land is falling into the sea. So I don't need to dwell on that. But this picture is quite interesting because it does show how we can use some archaeology that we can fix the positions of that when it was built, and we can relate that to the receding coastline. And in the distance, you see lots of groins, nicely protecting the landscape, but holding back the sediment. So that poor chap's about to fall into the sea. So when we look at the data, what data can we use to understand coastal change? So we've got paleoenvironmental data in archaeology, which I have outlined briefly. We can look at art, then there's maps and charts, and then there's historical documents and photographs. So I'll start by returning to the Western Solent, because this is such a wonderful area that has a nice sort of chronology of archaeology and paleoenvironmental material. That was our first data sets we're looking at. I did flip through this one quickly on Tuesday, but I just wanted to point out here that the Western Solent, just like the North Sea, was once a valley, large valley, and then it became an estuary, and it filled up with sediment. And then ultimately, the Isle of Wight separated from the mainland. This is automatically flipping. The Isle of Wight separated from mainland Britain in the same way that Great Britain separated from the continent, and it did again a few years ago. But what we then had was the sediments that were left behind, as they are on the North Sea. The sediments that are left behind do tell the story of that ongoing process of separation. So just going back into the Solent, into this Bolton Cliff, one of my favourite sites that we've used quite a lot. This is a section through the site, and you can see on the left here a schematic, and it shows the sort of, that's the old paleo surface, that's the bottom of the valley, and then you had the sediments build up on top, and then you had sort of other sea levels, still stands, etc., and other organic growth. And then there's a diver in the middle that's paralleling this section, and then in the bottom right-hand corner, you can see root systems for an oak tree that's 8,000 years old, 8,500 years old, that's part of that ancient land surface. And importantly, as you travel up that sequence, you're traveling through time. And all the way through that sequence, it's got a long chronology that's explaining how the sea level has changed, how the environment's changed, where the sediments came from, etc., and how they're built up. And you can get to that. It's like one big section when you jump down in the Solent. So when I show you the images, that image of the landscape, you see the landscape on the top on the beach, then below it you've got that cliff, and then at the bottom you've got the platform. So you've got the nice platform here with the trees at the bottom, which that contains lots of archaeological material and paleoenvironmental material. Chronologically, you go up the cliff, into the beach, and of course across to the intertidal zone. So that's a very long temporal sequence that can be analysed to really understand how the climate has changed and how it's adapted, and also how humans have adapted. So the sort of questions we ask of this landscape have been broken down so that we can get some form of score and we can rate the value of some of these the places. And that's what I mentioned before about having a score, trying to quantify the significance of these sites. And once you can quantify them, you can turn around to coastal managers and engineers and say, this particular site's good because it's got this high score, etc. And this is a process that we've been applying to all the different data sets. So here we look at sea level change. What can it tell us about sea level change? A nice long sequence, that's great. So it's got a maximum score of 3. Does it tell us about environmental change? Yes, as I've just described, maximum of 3. And temporal continuity, have we got a long continual stream of information? Again, the top score. And then we got some describing elements to what sort of site it is, whether it's eroding away, is it still there, is it gone, is it accessible, and the coastal context, which is information that we can look at collectively when we want to query some of these results. So this has got a top score, well, it's 9, which is then turned into a percentage when we look at all the other archaeological and paleoenvironmental evidence. And of course, I showed you the intertidal zones, still very relevant, sort of things that we probably find around the sort of or North Sea coasts, if the sediments are removed. On the left, you've got here, that's an old Roman causeway, a couple of thousand years old. And then on the right-hand side, where you've got the scale, that sort of Bronze Age structure, about 3,200 years old. So again, as you're going down the beach, you're sort of going back in time, and it gives you that sort of chronology of change using the archaeology, which is, you can date the archaeology, of course. You've got dendrochronology, carbon-14, so you can date it, so you can get some high-resolution information about that coastline, how it formed, and now how it's eroding away because it's exposed. So this is something that we looked at across all the different sites, and just give you one example here. This is Newlyn, And all the information was pulled together and put into a database, and that's put into the Maritime Atlas and presented spatially on a map and chart, which is actually transgressed into the visualization tool, which you saw on Tuesday in more detail. So this just gives you an idea of some of the sources of material, what's to do with things by itself. Some of the databases, the heritage archives that we looked at, that the team all looked at, and the various publications. So we trawled through as much information as we could with all the data sources, and I suppose that's what we should do because we're archaeologists, we can find those data sources, pulled all the information out, and then scored every site with, say, we turned the sort of 9 or 8 or 7 into a percentage. We've scored every site, and we've tabulated it all within the big database in the Maritime Atlas, and these are just sections from the Maritime Atlas. But just as looking at Newtown, you've got the prehistoric submarine landscape, which is the old forest, and of course that seemed to get the highest score because it had that same issues of continuity and information that can help us understand the past. We also looked at art, as I mentioned, and with art again, we've defined certain characteristics, certain artistic styles, which is the most advantageous medium, the value of the subject matter, and the value of the time period, to try and break down these describers that would help us understand the significance and value of art in the sort of coastal change context. And here I've got the Crowstone, which is in Southend on Sea, dates back, the position of the Crowstone dates back to the sort of 13th century, about 1285, when it was first marked as a sort of the limit of the responsibility of the City of London for the navigation of the River Thames. And that Crowstone is still there today. We didn't see it. It was, I went past it the other day, but didn't actually stop and look at it. But it's still a marker, so it's a fixed point in the landscape. So the art can tell us, well, when it comes to here, it's got the subject matter, it's got coastal views, but this art has got a fixed point in the landscape that we can relate to the position today and also to elements of the coastline. This is just an example, of course. There are many other sites, many other images, and on Tuesday I finished with that church falling into the sea as a nice little marker, know where it is, so you can work out the rate and the pace of coastal change and coastal erosion through time with these sort of markers. And another one I showed you this earlier, but it's quite significant because it shows us landslip complex. We know back in 1870 there's landslips happening around this particular area. These are very useful because you can look, as I mentioned before, areas of site stability or areas of site movement when it comes to insurance and risk, which can be incorporated into those sort of decision-making processes, and also where you might not want to build with your urban plans. Well, art is also very useful because it can be quite dramatic, and this art, again, this image of Vlissingen, Flushing, is nice and detailed, give you a lot of information about the town, where buildings are, where the defences are, and where the coastline is. And these can be very valuable when you start comparing them with today. And of course, many images are just lovely, and they're worth looking at. And I didn't sort of go through the detail of some of the art descriptors, but one aspect is looking at the sort of the accuracy of the art itself. 10 minutes left, okay. The accuracy of the art itself and the detail within it. And there can also be artifacts, there can be ships or shipwrecks in relative places that can give you positions from that particular point to the land, etc. And what we found is when we've been doing this for about over 20 years now, when we're putting forward images of muddy bits of wood in the beach, as you've already seen, and underwater sites, which don't really inspire people too much. But if you start giving them images, giving them nice artistic paintings, works of art, they tend to respond much more positively, and you can engage people. And you can engage people, coastal managers, but you can also engage the public much more readily. So it's a very powerful tool, even if quite often the art, as you can see on the right here, doesn't really, it depicts a true event, but it might not be as true to life as potentially as happened at the time. That was the breaking of the dikes around Amsterdam. And yes, and so here, I say, looking at Vlissingen, again, every piece of art is described and scored appropriately. So we can work out what significant pieces of art, archaeology, etc., we want to involve. The same applies to charts and maps, that we've identified specific characteristics within charts and maps, that we can look to see how accurate they are, when they were made, and what they really tell us about the landscape. So it's the accuracy is important. The geometric accuracy is how we can actually then find that map and how we can put it back onto one of the various different global coordinate systems, so we can really use it in detail. And that really applies to the chronometric accuracy as well, is how it's looking at features in the map and how they really relate to the features nowadays. So here we have Ostend, of course, and one thing that's quite obvious is you have, quite clear, that you have that foreshore which has now receded quite extensively, which marries up with a lot of the other evidence we've seen in more recent history. And the subject matter with the charts are very important. So here you've got the whole of Flanders. You can see the great dune system running down the coastline there, quite stable. This is before too much of this sort of hard infrastructure was put in place. And you get evidence of sandbanks, etc. So you can start understanding long-term patterns of coastal development and geomorphology. You can also compare them. So as we go through time, they tend to get more accurate. Well, it depends on the school of cartography or map making. They tend to be more accurate, and you can start sort of comparing them with each other to see where the changes happened, and with current maps. So here, what we have, I've overlaid a map from the 17th century on top of the current flood risk map. Can you all hear me? It seems to go loud every now and again. On top of the flood risk map, and what you can pick out here is you can pick out where all the old channels are, like the Southend estuary and all the old waterways, and then you can see where the polders have been put in place. And today, all that poldering are the locations where you've got the greatest risk of flood now. So these are stories that you can explain to the public. Say, we're not going to knock down any walls, although they did at the Southend estuary, not going to knock the dikes down. But the reason these areas are going to be flooding or flooded, we have it in historical record. We can tell where the likely flood risk is greatest and why. And once you can explain that to people, they're more likely to come on your side. And everything is, again, rated, certain percentages depending on the scoring. Everything is rated and put inside the Maritime Atlas. And the final subject is photographic scoring, where we look at the purpose, the coastal view, the heritage view, and the quality of the images. So yeah, so if it's a nice, pretty touristy picture, it might not rate too highly. If it's a coastal view showing coastal features, of course, much more important, and heritage view even better. And I just show these photos again because they sum it up really well. You have got a bit of a not so much a photograph, but 1852. You got nice watercolour of Leon Sea, which we all went to the other day. And then as you go through time, you can see those changes quite dramatically, and you can generally start understanding why the coast has changed, and therefore you can sort of mitigate against any future threats and changes because you understand what's happened in the past. You can make better decisions about the future. And then somewhere like Mariagegi, excuse me for pronouncing it incorrectly, but by Ostend, you can look at the sea levels back at the turn of the 19 sort of 10s compared with today, and you have those nice big sea walls there, but then the beach, as we discussed on Tuesday, was pretty much ripped away because you upset the link, the adaptability of it, until modern times, of course. Now it's been backfilled again. The beach has been built up, which is actually giving more protection to the buildings behind, because the beach soaks up the water energy. So you can see, looking back in sort of 1910, 1920, why those storms had such a big impact, because the quality, the thick depth of the water hitting the grey infrastructure was much larger than it is today. So all that material, I say, all the evidence goes into our Maritime Atlas, where all these great big databases and scored information behind it. So it's not just a case of pretty pictures. We do look at it all fairly scientifically. And not that you need to read this, but this is just showing you examples of what's within the database. And that database, of course, is accessible to anyone that wants to look at it, and it has images behind it as well. But really, we've moved on from that, and we've moved on to the visualization tool. So that's information that you can access through the visualization tool. So you don't necessarily need to, unless you really want a detailed study, at the Maritime Atlas. So you can go straight to the visualization tool, as was described on Tuesday, go to the various sites and to look at the all the different records, and you can see what the most significant sites are, and generally what story they tell us about the changing coastline and what we can do next. I'm going to finish with our spatial planning decision-making model that's just been finalised, which I think will be discussed further by Franje and the team, been finalised by Jonathan, just turned up on Tuesday. Jonathan, who's not here today, unfortunately. But what it does show you from a longue durée perspective, that it's now been incorporated within this decision-making model right through it. You can't really read it, just trust me. But it's right at the beginning. You got in the initiation, you got to create the Maritime Atlas. In the master plan, you can look and understand, you can read those records to understand how the coastline has changed, as we've discussed. With the urban design, you can start introducing some of those lessons learned to the general public to help influence the design and think about working around heritage structures. And then during the construction, you have your database behind you of heritage sites, so you have all that information in place to work around it without damaging it. And you can also incorporate the heritage in your construction to enhance the urban design and the urban project to make it a better place for everyone. That built heritage, I think, is a very strong driver for giving people a sense of place and sense of belonging. And with that, I think my time for belonging is over, and I better sit down and we'll get back to my seat and leave the floor for the next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. That was really interesting to see the atlas and how you are actually scoring the archaeological evidence. So now we're going to invite Franje to come tell us about some of the modeling that TU Delft have done, especially on some of the pilots. And there are some nice pictures, so that's always nice. So over to you, Franje.
Can I use this as a, do you see this? No, you don't. That you can point things out here, but you don't see it here, right?
Oh yeah, I think if you just click on this.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Laser pointer.
There
Oh
you
yeah,
go.
excellent. Okay. Good morning, everybody in the room, at home. So, I'm gonna explain to you what the work we've been done in Work Package 1, and especially also within the TU Delft, because this project for us was also a nice opportunity to collaborate between the urbanism and the hydraulic engineering department, and also to really explore and bring further our interdisciplinary design skills and methodologies. Because, yeah, in practice, this is, of course, what happens within the municipalities on a daily basis, that you have to cooperate with people that are from another nature and with other skills. So I'm going to use the Vlissingen project as an example in this. First point what I need to make is that, especially in the Netherlands, and I guess also in Flanders, that the construction of the landscape, or the reconstruction of the landscape into urban zones, is quite a very strict and tight-knit construction at the moment. Especially in the Netherlands, you can see that everything is controlled. The water management, hydraulic engineering, flood management is basically seen by our hydraulic engineers as their responsibility, and that's the main condition for all life in the Netherlands, so they feel the responsibility. But also behind the dike there's a tight-knit construction of the water system with this urban system as a hybrid system, and that's why it's also, if you want to change this in also the way, in the municipalities, they worked in a protocolized way. There are ways how to deal with this, but to do it differently, to take nature-based solutions maybe as a new perspective is quite difficult, because the system is really aimed at the humans, so the humans first, and the human utilities and needs. So this is an interesting perspective on how can we participate again with nature. So instead of using nature as a surface, how can we participate in this again? So that was really the question. And if you look at the risk approach in the Netherlands, and I would say also in the other countries, you have the probability, raising the dike, so preventing the flood, or times the consequences. So bringing down the consequences is also a mean to bring down the risks. So this is, in the sections you can see that the first 5 is really about raising the dike, And then the last two are about reducing the consequences and adapting your space to to accommodate the flood water and without harming the people there. So the Vlissingen case, in that sense, was a bit different than the other cases because, yeah, accepting water, is that also a nature-based solution, or is that maybe nature-based planning? As Gary just finished off with, we have this output 1, which is basically the Nature Inclusive Urban Coastal Management Framework. It's now named, but this is still under revision, so the others need to accept this too. It's aimed at professionals in the municipalities because it's showing all the governance layers of urban development, the policy layers from Europe to local, and then in the mid there's the phases of the urban project, the spatial planning decision-making model. And I'm going to explain to you because, it's too much, that we did, I'm going to show you more explicit on this design and assess part, which is in the whole scheme, which is over here, this one. But as you can see, the longue durée, and this is where the atlas is, what Gary explained, then the urban project, making a vision, making a strategy, and then developing the project and design it is the whole part. So again, back to Vlissingen, Marije already explained the whole situation there, where they have this historical urban front, and they had this initial idea of accepting, so reducing the consequences, accepting a storm, and get water over the dike, but accommodate this. Then, of course, the question is, how much is it, and can it be accommodated in that place? I think what's also important to mention that the water will be caught in the spuikom, which is also a hydrological artifact over time. So it has been functioning as part of that space, as a part of the water system, as you can see in this first image. But at the moment, it's a green dog walking space, basically. So also, it's a green space that's very appreciated by the people around, but it also needs an upgrade. So therefore, you see the win-win situation already with, how can you combine flood management with, increasing the amenities in your city. But it does mean that you, of course, make the infrastructure project of dike becomes urban development, an area development project, and that has a very different approach and cost-benefit analysis, and this is what we really, ran into when working with the hydraulic engineers, because they can very well predict the amount of water and also how the dike needs to be raised, how much money it costs, how fast they will build it. But an area development is, of course, something entirely different, which has much more fuzziness. We wrote a paper about this. I'm not going to go into it now. So this was a sort of a first image of where would the water go. And what is important, that you work with scenarios of sea level rise and also temperature change, and that within, looking at the area, that you need this bandwidth to see how much water we can expect. So that's what we did. We took the warm scenario, which is the worst case scenario, and the moderate scenario, and looked at the area, and these are the models of Andres, looked at the area within specific also risk calculations, how much water would come over the dike. So on the left you see the warm plus, risk 1 in 100,000 years for the whole area, and on the left the same, but then the moderate scenario. You already can see the resolution of the color, the difference in the inundation that will be in that place. Then we said, it was a lot of water. Let's take a less high risk, 1 in 10,000, which is still, of course, enormous. And you can already see that the colors become lighter. So there's less water, and again, for the two scenarios, and still the whole area. And then we said, we need to only focus on the spuikom. So you also, in hydraulic engineering, in the dike management, they also look at dike part. So we're taking only this part, and how much water does actually come into the spuikom at that location. So here again in 1,000 years, so this is basically the amount of water that we started to do the project with. So in the warm plus scenario, in 10,000 years, during a storm of say 5 hours, there will be around 270,000 cubic meter water. In the moderate scenario, it will be around 80,000. So you can see there's quite a big difference. I must say that when we were making this drawing, you can see this is the spuikom which will fit 180,000 cubic meters of water. Everything was cubic, actually. That it doesn't fit, and then it needs to go elsewhere. It needs to go to the back. Well, then you run into a lot of things about pumps and how much water can go in there. That at one point we were discussing this with the engineers. I was like, let's just raise the dike because it becomes really complicated. But then, if you don't go through these complications, then you really need to, then it will never change, and that's what we want. So that's maybe another project. So here you can see the drawing of how the spuikom needs to be altered to be, it's basically sort of second dike line where you can store this, store the 180,000 cubic meter of waters, and here you can see a bit of the prediction of the timeline. So here, this is the final image where you can see that in the warm scenario, in 2100, there will be this 270,000 cubic meters. And in 2100, with a moderate scenario, there's 80,000 cubic meters. And the capacity is this. So with the building of this street that they're now doing, accepting the water coming over the dike, Vlissing is safe until 2070 at least. So there are still a lot of years that they could accommodate this solution. After that, at that time, we also know, maybe better, which scenario we are following. Did everybody stop eating meat? And are we really reducing the output and also, making the temperature not go high as fast as it is going now, currently? If so, then the solution is forever. If not, then you can always, of course, go into these gray solutions if necessary. So this is the image that Marije also showed, which I think is beautiful. So this street is the first street as a river in the Netherlands. So we discussed they need to invite the King, our Delta program manager, to show this because, it's the first time that we're really at the coast in this Cape Town, accepting water coming over the dike and making it into something that is appreciated and good for the town in essence, because it also adapts to climate change and rainwater nuisance. So I have a few concluding remarks that I wrote down to be sure. I still have, I can't read it, 5 minutes, I'll be faster. I think what we really learned in cooperating with the engineers in this project is that engineers can also support this line of work. It's not as if you change from gray solutions to green solutions that you take away their work, because this is maybe sometimes how they feel. It's not true at all, because there's, a lot of their knowledge that is really needed, as you can see, to also predict and understand what the water system will do. So I think that's one very big, they can change also, so that's a big conclusion. Also, nature-based solutions can really be a first step in flood management, seeing flood management over a longer time. So not that you have one dike that you make sure you will be safe for 100 years. No, that you will have maybe a foreshore or the other solutions that we see in the pilots. That is a step in being safe in the future and also increasing your amenities in the time. So I think that's a second important conclusion. I think also nature-based solutions are a perspective that can create a shared goal. So you also have to understand that for hydraulic engineers, nature-based solutions, they support their goal, which is making a town safe. While for us in urbanist departments, nature-based solutions have many more amenities. It's also about people having a nice environment, a healthy environment, a natural environment, a biodiverse environment. So we have very different goals, and it does help you really find each other and create a shared future. I'm not showing this here, but for Southend on Sea, we did basically the same. And we asked the engineers in the first step to create a vision. They're never asked to create a vision. So for them, it was also like, vision. But in the end, their idea about drawing a line where you would have foreshore and then maybe also accepting consequences behind the dike for this city, has been defined the vision in a very strategic way. So it was very important for them because they think, of course, in topography, and that is an additional dimension that we also need to think with in urbanism as well. So that is, I think, very important. The last point is that nature-based solutions, especially on the larger scale, is also connecting other challenges in the city. So what you can see in Vlissingen is that the street is also will also store or infiltrate rainwater, because we also suffer from rainwater storms. The street is now going to become very green. Before, that was only stone. It was basically a horrible street. So you can see that you really can connect it, and that especially, nature is the basis of life. So we really need to take this as the primary condition where we want to live with. So really, working this out and working this up is a quite important goal. And you can only really do this in coastal zones if you also make it part of the flood management. If not, then it will always be two worlds, and it will also not bring this synergy. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Francia. That was really interesting to see the detail behind some of the planning that's gone into the pilots. So I'm sure we're going to be getting loads of questions about that. So do use Mentimeter. So now we're going to move on to a presentation by Hannah from Vives about ecosystem services. It's looking at the value of ecosystem services. So this is really nicely linking to some of the talks we've heard about already. So over to you, Hannah.
So good morning, everyone. Thank you for the introduction, David. Before I'm going to talk about the services that are related to ecosystems, I would like to introduce you to the term ecosystem. Many of you already know what it is, but I saw yesterday in the Mentimeter that we have a very diverse public. So some of you will already know what it is, but for those who do not know it, I will explain it now. Okay. So an ecosystem, it's very basic. This is a typical definition of it. It's a complex of plants, animals, and organisms that interact with each other, and also with the environments. So an ecosystem, it has several sizes. It can be very small, like for example a pond you can see here with trees, fishes, plants, and so on. But it can be also very big, like an entire ocean basin. The entire ocean basin is the biggest ecosystem that exists on Earth. It has more than 500,000 species, so it can be big, But we are today going to talk about nature-based solutions, and in nature-based solutions you have as well ecosystems. And linked to those ecosystems in nature-based solutions we have the services. So now I'm moving forward to the services. Generally seen, there are four main ecosystem services. This is a classical theory that you see here, and today this is the framework of our research as well. So you have four different services. For those who do not know it yet, you can see it here in this illustration. So first of all, you have the provisioning ecosystem services. Those are the products obtained from ecosystems, for example, fish, wood, and clean water. Secondly, you have also cultural ecosystem services, and those are the non-material benefits like recreation and education. Thirdly, you have the regulating ecosystem services, and these include the services which regulate the ecological balance. So, for example, storage of carbon. And lastly, you have the supporting ecosystem services, and those are the services that are necessary for the production of all the other services. So, like, for example, biodiversity. So, remember this framework, because this is really the basis of our research. And if you put everything together, so you have the ecosystems, then you have the services, then you get this illustration. I'm showing you this because we are today going to talk about the values of systems, and you can see it here. So at the left, you see the green box, and it represents the ecosystems with processes and functions. I'm not going to explain to you what processes and functions are because my time is limited. But deriving from those ecosystems, you have ecosystem services. And if you move forward to the box on the right, you can see the socio-economic systems. And it's there that we can find the benefits derived from the services, and we give them a value. So those are two separate things. So you have the benefits, and then we value the benefits. And if you go further, you see that management is mentioned and social responses. So it's clear that we have a big influence on the ecosystems and the services. And if we manage them very well, we have a better biodiversity, excuse me. And then we go back to the left. And if we can go up again, then the processes can move forward and get better. And then the loop is complete. So the key message is that we need to manage everything very well, and then we can keep on going, and we can get more services out of the ecosystems. This slide represents, it's a graph from Google. So Google, they digitize everything they see. And like you can see here, this graph represents all the publications that are mentioned in Google about ecosystem services and nature-based solutions. So it tracks everything. And like you can see from 1995, it started to increase. So it's rather a new topic, ecosystem services, especially related to nature-based solution. And like you can see at the end, like in 2019, it increases very well. Then we had a small decline, and then it increased again. So the key message is it's a very new topic, and we need to keep on going, and we need to research much more. But there is still a problem statement. Ecosystems, they are still undervalued. Even though we do a lot of research, we still need to do much more, and that's the reason why they're also undervalued. Another reason is that they provide benefits to external persons who are not directly paying for these. So that's normal that people don't pay attention to such types of products. Another problem is that we mismanage many of them, and it makes them not sustainable. So we need to have a solution for that by, for example, giving them a value. So remember the illustration 2 slides back, that we can get benefits and value out of ecosystems. Well, that's what we need to do. We need to give them another monetary value, for example, and it makes them more visible because money, everybody knows the language of money, so that's easy to understand. So it's a manner to communicate between several stakeholders, and it also increases the long-term impact by better deploying resources. But it's very challenging. The approach we did in SARCC is the ecosystem approach. We added a holistic research lens to it. Holism is already mentioned 2 days ago, I think, or yesterday, I'm not sure anymore. For those who do not know what holism is, this slide represents this very well. So holism is that you study the totality of everything. You're not looking to one specific aspect of an environment or a landscape, but you look at all of them. And therefore, we did a holistic approach because we analyzed everything. So the 4 main ecosystem services categories that I showed you, we analyzed them, all of them. Because everyone looks different to ecosystem services, and we have so many different stakeholders. Each city is so different, and we wanted to address answers to policy, socio-cultural members, and also economical members. But that requires a lot of interdisciplinarity research. At the bottom you can see actually a small illustration I almost forgot. It's in the theme of the season, then football. But the thing is that I want to show you here is that you need to look at the whole, just not at one specific point of the football, but really need to see it as a whole, and then you see the complete picture. So that's a bit the thing about holism. Look at the whole. The ecosystem approach, yeah, we use proxies to value those services. What is a proxy? It's an approximation of the true value, and you can do that in 3 ways. First of all, you can give a monetary value. That's the most common way of expressing value. Second of all, you can do a qualitative approximation, and a quantitative approximation is the third one. You can do that by, you can go in the field and measure everything, but there also exist some scientific tools, and that's very useful. And those tools, they have 3 different types of analysis, like for example, retrospective, and that means that you go back to the nature-based solutions, so you analyze them when they are already implemented. Simultaneously is that you analyze them while they are implemented, and then you have prospective, and that's that you're going to analyze them before they are implemented. On this slide, you can see some examples of proxies that we analyzed. It's really a very short list that you see here because the list is very long, but I cannot explain to them all of them to you. So I will just give some examples on how we calculated everything. For example, you see here the fourth one, the willingness to pay. The willingness to pay is a benefit that is deriving from a cultural ecosystem service, and it's the willingness to pay for green infrastructure. And we put an amount of euro or pound on that, and then you can see how much euro or pound people want to pay to have green in their area. Tools can calculate that with a bunch of data, like for example, the number of local people that are using green infrastructure, the profile of types of activity, and so on. So yeah, it's really about calculations and formulas and so on. So it's very complex, but you can find that all in the guides of the tools. So that's useful. Another one is, for example, the last one, the avoided cost for sand cleaning. That's a very important one for the Belgian coast. The benefit avoiding sand cleaning, it's estimated by, for example, by the yearly cost for cleaning, and then you also measure the length of the dunes and so on. So it's again about formulas, and then you can put a number on that. So it's a regulating ecosystem service. Within SARCC, we wanted to create a replicable method for other pilots and other coastal regions. We did that by following 5 steps. But I also want to say we tested this methodology in the 3 Belgian pilots because we are close to them and we can get really easily data. But the main aim is that we can reproduce that methodology for other pilots as well. In the first step, we compiled a list of tools. In total, we analyzed 30 tools, so digital tools from different universities, institutions, and so on. And out of that, we selected the right ones for nature-based solutions, especially linked to coastal regions. After that, we gathered the data, we put that in the tools, and then we needed to interpret the results. In this slide, you can see the tools we analyzed. You can see some of them. It's not complete here, this slide. But in total, like I said, we analyzed 30 of them. And out of this package, we selected 2 of them. And how did we do that? We had a bunch of criteria, and then we selected, for example, is it free to use? Because that's very important. If it is free, everyone can use it, of course. Is it easy to use? How long does it take to complete the tool and get the results of the ecosystem services and so on? And out of that, we selected 2 ones, that's GI, VAL, and BEST. They are both from the UK. And we selected those. After that, we needed to gather data. That's quite a process, the gathering of data, and we did that with interviews. We had also a lot of input from the pilot managers. We had also help from our students who did internships and also field research and so on. And at the bottom you can see the 3 pilots we tested. So Ostende at the left, the Middelkerke at the right, and Blankenberge in the middle. In this slide you can see a small insight. You can see small insights into our results for the 3 pilots. So here you can see especially the benefits in numbers. So that's very interesting, I think. For example, in Ostende, you see that the willingness to pay for green coming from tourists is €5.3 a year. That's a lot. If you compare it with the residents, that's only €1.67 a year. So it's a nice insight in green infrastructure. Another one is, for example, that the avoided cost for sand cleaning in Ostende is €11,273 a year. So that's also a lot. But and then if you look at, for example, 10 years, then the number gets always bigger and bigger. And in Middelkerke, we see actually the same. The avoided cost for sand cleaning is there 38,000. I see Steen is not here anymore. That's a number for him. So that's a lot. It's much more than in Ostende, so that's good. We have also, for example, a reduced mortality of 100,067. So that's also a lot, and so on. And then if we move to Blankenberge, we can see, for example, that the land and property values, they are expected to increase with €5.96 million. So that's, again, a lot. But I need to say, these numbers that you see here, they are an underestimation. Because there are so many factors we need to incorporate, so we chose for the underestimation. So in reality, it's probably a bit higher. But we are very careful with these numbers, so we chose for the underestimation. Okay, I have still 30 seconds, I see. So I wanted to progress to the key messages. Valuing ecosystem services, that's very useful to inform decision processes, of course. That's already mentioned many times during this conference. I also think a holistic view is very important, because then you can approach a wider audience, because we have so many stakeholders at our coasts who have all a different perspective on the coastal regions. Of course, ecosystems, calculating ecosystems is still a developing area. You remember the graph that I showed? It's still increasing, and I think it will increase for many years to come. So we still need to learn a lot. Also, a really important one is that services are not static. Landscapes, they constantly develop, and they are very dynamic, because the space, the time, and the scale, it constantly changes because of the interaction with people, the action and the interaction of people and the environment. So it's very hard to put a number on that, but we tried with this methodology. And a nice insight is also that we had a small validation from the monitoring and evaluation survey from the JET team, the joint evaluation team. But Flavia will tell something more about that. But I have already two things we validated, and that's, for example, the capturing of sand increases. That's also something you found in your scores, and also the economical quality increases. But I'm not going to say anything more about that, so that's for Flavia. Thank you.
Thanks, Hannah. We will just crack on straight on to Flavia's presentation. As Hannah mentioned, we've been monitoring all the pilots, and we've been speaking to all the pilot managers and gathering a lot of information about the entire process, from the initial design and concept all the way through to delivery. So Flavia is going to tell us how that research went, and some of the main outcomes, and then keep asking your questions on the Mentimeter, and we will have a panel discussion straight after Flavia finishes her talk. So I would like to invite Flavia up, and over to you. Yeah.
Well, it's going to be a short presentation. I will give a short introduction about our work, an overview of the SARCC pilots, and the theoretical and methodological approach that we used, what if and how the pilots in SARCC were successful, and some highlights per pilot. I cannot go into detail because we have a lot of data, and some main conclusions that we draw across comparing all the pilot projects. The Hazet University was part of the JET joint evaluation team together with Vives and EXO, and we contributed into the development of Output 1, the new framework and monitoring tool that Gary also showed before. And how we did that, we evaluated the impact and the outcomes of the 7 pilot projects on mainstreaming nature-based solutions in coastal cities. And our lessons learned and input provided input actually for the entire monitoring and framework and monitoring tool, because we gathered information from the design phase of the pilot through monitoring and monitoring public engagement and implementation phase. You already know the pilots by now because they were explained yesterday quite well. I only want to highlight here that the pilots are also, they also have a difference in the way that they are managed and by whom they are managed. For instance, Middelkerk and Ostende pilot, there is a direct and a continuous collaboration between the municipality and the regional coastal authority. The New Lint pilot was mainly managed by the regional coastal authority, while the rest of the pilots were managed by municipalities. So that's also a difference that is important in the governance, from the governance point of view, and to analyze the governance context of pilot projects. We use the pilot paradox. It's a methodological, it's an approach, it's a theory that we used to gather our data. We translated this theory into questions and we asked pilot managers these questions. And the pilot paradox, it's formed by 5 conditions that we used to analyze the pilot process and also the mainstreaming process, and we consider that external process of the pilot. And this paradox, it is a paradox because it says that the same conditions that make a pilot a success can also hinder or be an obstacle for the external success. And in SARCC, we considered external success the mainstreaming of nature-based solutions into the current management approach of local or regional authorities. And I will go briefly through these 5 dimensions, these 5 conditions, and how we analyze them regarding the internal process and also the external process or mainstreaming process. So the first one is the position of the pilot, and that has to do with the position of the pilot. How far is the pilot from the current coastal management approach, and that is translated directly into the flexibility and the freedom that pilots have to explore, to learn, to test ideas. While if we look at the mainstreaming process, it has to do with developing actually a strategy to connect these pilots and decrease this distance from the pilot to the regime by developing a strategy to decrease this distance. Resources distribution, it has to do with in the internal pilot process to look for additional resources besides the resources that are available from the project to enhance and have more resources to learn and experiment and innovate. And regarding the external process, it has to do with making sure that once there are results from the pilots, if these results are going to be can fit the resource allocation of current policies. Participants have to do with the involvement of diversity of actors from different disciplines and different sectors, and that during the pilot process, these actors are open-minded, that they are critical with what they hear, that they are willing to experiment and willing to take risks. And among these actors, that they're also agents of change that Patrick also mentioned yesterday, and they're also called scientifically, scientifically they're also called boundary spanners. And make sure that once the pilot is finished, if we want to mainstream these results from pilots, that there is a diversity of actors that have been involved, that are also representatives of the implementation arena. And with that we mean the key actors that have competences in coastal management locally and regionally. We also looked at the process design, that during the pilot process to make sure that is a process that is tailor-made to the local conditions, the local interests, the local problems, and regarding the mainstreaming of the results, to make sure that these results are ready and for being mainstreamed, and that this is clear what to do and how to embed these results. And the last one, the project design, it has to do with making sure that there is enough time, space, knowledge, resources available to get high results and high insights, quality insights on nature-based solutions. And in order to facilitate the mainstreaming of these results, is that there needs to be a clear understanding of the system, not only locally but also regionally, in order to make use of these results, and that the results from the pilots are actually representative for and relevant for the system. During the SARCC pilots, then using this theoretical approach, we developed questionnaires and interviews, and we sent these questionnaires to all the pilot managers per phase. I have been pursuing them every couple of months to get these questionnaires. The same questionnaire we send every pilot phase, so we could compare the results. And I also conducted interviews with the pilot managers, either during the implementation phase or right after the implementation phase, because there was more information and more progress in the pilots. And I also conducted 24 interviews with external actors from local and regional authorities, with policymakers, with civil servants, coastal engineers, scientists and nature organizations as well in the Netherlands, Belgium, and UK. And that was very interesting to get the input from external actors on the role of pilot projects and in mainstreaming nature-based solutions for coastal adaptation, and how they see these pilots and what are relevant conditions to mainstream. We also did document analysis. We visited the pilots, and it was also, of course, relevant to exchange information during the meetings. I will go a bit faster. I have 5 minutes left. Okay. We also asked the pilot managers if pilots were successful, and it seemed that they were quite successful during SARCC because they all achieved their goal, but they were also successful externally, so in the mainstreaming of the lessons learned and nature-based solutions. Mainstreaming means different things to different people. I picked some of the quotes from the interviews and also the questionnaires that success is when people accept nature-based solutions, communities, policymakers, or when these pilots can be replicated. Some highlights per pilot. We analyzed all these conditions. Blankenberge was mainly a pilot that tested a very innovative solution. So there is still a distance from the pilot aim to the current coastal management regime because it's quite innovative, so they still have to learn more about this solution. Ostende pilot was a very nice example, very high scores. There is also like a difference in scores for the position of the pilot, and that has to do with the challenge that they face of protection, the protection of the area. Middelkerke was also a very nice example that it's already mainstreaming nature-based solutions, replicating the pilot somewhere else. So it's a very good example for Belgium, but also other countries where they were also agents of change, that the MDK and also municipalities were very much involved, and citizens also acted as agents of change through social media. The New Lean pilot, I can say about the New Lean pilot that it's also they faced the challenge of less flexible regulations for regarding new ideas. They had this new idea that they wanted to implement, but actually they had to change the aim of the pilot because the current coastal management policies was not didn't make it very easy. So they had to change the aim of the pilot to a research and development pilot, and it was to learn more about these innovative ideas before mainstreaming them. Southend pilots, they had a bit of limited time actually to implement the measures and monitor. And Vlissingen pilot also scored quite high in most of the conditions. They have the challenge in the to ensure finances for long-term monitoring. And Gravelin pilot scored pretty low in most of the conditions. It was just a pilot. They wanted to learn, but actually the pilot manager said that what they learned is still not enough to have enough insights to replicate this pilot somewhere else. And also that in France, the current coastal management policies do not support and don't have enough knowledge on mainstreaming nature-based solutions. Some main conclusions and messages to take home is that, in SARCC, all the pilots were internally successful because they all reached their goal. They implemented nature-based solutions. Regarding mainstreaming, we cannot say so much because there was not enough time to within SARCC to monitor these pilots and to gather more empirical evidence. But from the empirical evidence we have, we can say that Ostende, Middelkerke, and New Lean and Vlissingen are on the good way, on the way of mainstreaming nature-based solutions. And two factors that supported this mainstreaming and facilitated this mainstreaming to start happening during SARCC was a clear strategy and a clear vision in how to mainstream nature-based solutions, and also a combination of a strong collaboration between the local and the regional coastal management authorities. And success, it's also dynamic, so it depends on not only on one condition, but on a combination of conditions. And also in the regarding the context where the pilot is developed, every pilot has its own conditions, and a pilot can be a really good opportunity and a tool to learn and gather more empirical evidence. So we can say that it is a seed that it's planted that it can grow over time, and once it starts growing, it can also turn into a battlefield, the battleground, because there can be more disagreements between authorities and between actors that from different administrative levels and different sectors and with different needs and interests that work together and need to take decisions together. So here is where it is relevant to have these agents of change or boundary spanners that have this capacity in really picking up these lessons learned and be confident and spread them around and use their network to make formal and real changes in the ground. And finally, a strong collaboration between urban and flood risk authorities is key, and also getting on board the local communities and nature organizations to get them early in the process on board, as well as collaborating with cross-border with our neighbors. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Flavia. Can I ask all the speakers so far to come join us on the panel? We will now move over to some questions. Some really interesting presentations, and I've seen that a few people have been chatting online already, which is great. Can you squeeze through? Okay. Yeah, if you don't mind sharing the two microphones, they should be on and unmuted, so just use those. So I will go back to the Mentimeter, and we can see that we already had quite a few come in, which is fantastic. So we have about half an hour for this panel, but if you have any questions in the room as well, just wave at me frantically, and I'll try to give you a chance to speak. But perhaps. One of the first questions, I'll go way back to Gary's presentation. How can the heritage of a coastline be used to prioritize which areas to protect? Can you use the microphone? Thank you.
Well, the heritage can be used in a couple of ways. Once, of course, there is the inherent value of the coastal heritage when you have significant protected sites. And I think we saw in an earlier slide from a couple of days ago, Hurst Castle, that's an ancient monument that's falling into the sea. So when you have these sites, well, then they have a priority in their own right to protect that bit of coastline. But really, for this project, a lot of what we've been looking at is how we can use the heritage and exposed elements of the heritage to help us identify immediate threats. And that's where things like the Roman posts or the Bronze Age material exposed on the intertidal zone for the first time in hundreds or thousands of years shows you that there is that immediate threat to the coastline, and that's one that one should look at in more detail and prioritize. So I'd say that exposure of ancient deposits, ancient sediments for the first time in thousands of years will give you the answer.
Thank you. And I think there is a follow-up question to that. So you've presented a vast array of evidence coming from all sorts of different sources. How do you scrutinize sources such as artwork to validate whether they're actually true depiction of the actual environment, or if it's just a vision of someone? Perhaps you might see one with a nice church on a cliff, but it was never built because it was just someone's dream to have a church on a hill.
Yeah, no, and that's true with a lot of art. But that's why we have these qualifying and quantifying questions to ask of the art itself, which are outlined. I ran over briefly, but of course they're within all the various documentation and the methods we use to actually assess bits of artwork. So we do critique it. So we work out whether it's just someone's dream or not, and then we will link it to the artist, etc., the school of art or whatever it might be, and the type of art. And then we would can also combine that with archaeological evidence or historical evidence to see whether that church did exist on the hill in the past. So all these subjects are combined, which perhaps I didn't really stress enough, but we do look at them more collectively, look at them together to feed into each other to get the answers that we need. So we do scrutinise that.
Brilliant. So I'll move over to some of the questions regarding to the Vlissingen pilot. So quite a few from for Franche. Someone's wondering if there were many conflicts of interest arising because the scope of the project is expanded from coastal defense, but also includes town planning, and it goes across all the different, I suppose, stakeholder groups. So was there a lot of conflict of interest maybe when the engineers are trying to do one thing whilst they're also deciding on how to do another thing, kind of protecting their own background?
Well, of course, the whole implementation phase with the people living in the area was done by the municipality itself. So Marij, I think, talked about it yesterday. He went around with a bus showing the people in the area that this is the approach. But I think that, well, from the start, the idea was to find out and research if this is a way to go. So if accepting the water and not raising the dike was feasible. And so the engineers did feel that it was more a multidisciplinary approach because they basically got the assignment to find out what the exact risk was, so what the flooding would induce and how much water was coming over the dike. So yeah, they in that sense played another role, and that's why we also afterwards did the pilot here in Southend-on-Sea, where we did ask them to, what for them when taking a nature-based approach would be a way on a longer-term strategic level to make Southend-on-Sea safe. So then it was more an interdisciplinary approach.
Okay, anyone has any comments? Not yet. So someone else was also wondering, so you're allowing water into the city in Vlissingen, and you used modeling for 1 in 100,000 years and 1 in 10,000 years storms, and you have the different amounts of water. But if you look at smaller events, at what point is the water going to start going into the city? How often will it happen? And is that going to affect, for example, the green space, which is currently used for dog walkers, as you mentioned, and general recreation? Is the salt water going to completely destroy all the vegetation there every couple of years? How is that going to be managed? Has that been considered?
Well, we took the 1 in 10,000 frequency, and it is also what you see, these volumes are in 2100. So it is quite extreme. So it is designing for the extreme. So yeah, it's never, you never, that's why you need this bandwidth also of scenarios to somehow have an understanding. So when it will happen, yes, it will destroy, it's because it's salt water, it will destroy the nature that is there at that moment for some time. It is not to say how often this will happen.
Okay, so it's almost like a last resort defense. If there is a really extreme event, it will prevent widespread damage, but it's not expected to kind of function on a very regular basis.
Well, it will be designed, I mean, it's a natural area that will be designed in a way that it brings a lot of biodiversity and amenities for the town every day of every year. So if this flooding will happen once every 5 years, yes, nature will have to recuperate. but that nature is much better at that than we are. So in that sense, the consequences are only there for the green area, not for people. So people will not die, there will not be other damage. So, yeah.
Thank you. So that brings me to another thought. Perhaps this one's good for Hannah to answer. What is the reasonable balance between reconnecting people to nature and ensuring that nature can actually thrive? And we're focusing on giving value, which is very human-centric. But are we actually considering value of nature for nature? And where is the balance between those two?
Yeah, we are valuing for nature, of course, but yeah, also for ourselves. Yeah, the thing is, numbering, evaluating everything, yeah, it's a very difficult thing to do. Yeah, but for people, we need to do it because everyone has another language. Everyone speaks in a different language. Like for example, policy members, they think completely different than another one. Like a scientific researcher, we all have different languages, so it's really important to value that for the people, but also for nature as well, because if you don't put a number on it, we cannot monitor anything. We need numbers, data, otherwise we cannot see if nature is getting worse or better, or the ecosystems are getting worse or better. So yeah, that's for both, yeah.
Okay. I mean, you mentioned, did you want to add something, Gary?
Well, I'm just going to add that the value, I think, is really quite significant, and I think that's something that's coming out of this this conference from the discussions we had on the first day to Hannah's presentation just there. It's a need to really attribute some form of value to these nature-based solutions, and one can do that with the rise in house prices or the values that were put forward by Han just now. So I think we need to apply figures, and that applies to the cultural heritage and the value of the cultural heritage, and how we can use that nature-based solution to improve society and make everyone richer and be seen to make everyone richer if we're going to try and attract more finances from financial institutions to support this work in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the ecosystem services are also very valuable for your research, for the longue durée. It's definitely a match, yeah. So that's really important to take into account as well. Yeah.
Yes, just to continue that little conversation, is that we will be doing the next stage, I think. We need to incorporate that into the visualization tool that we've talked about. And I think those queries will be sort of added over the next few months to really bring out that element, to make it more useful for internally and externally.
So we have a question in the room at the back. Isaac, can you bring a microphone across?
Hi, can you hear me? Yeah, it's more a comment really. I work at Southend on Sea City Council. I manage another EU Interreg project called Nature Smart Cities. We just spent the last 3 years developing a business model to value green infrastructure or blue-green infrastructure projects. It's an automated Excel tool, and it allows you to pick from 15 ecosystem services. So it encourages you to pick your priority 6 or 7, and it allows you to put in your potential plans. It allows you to compare different scenarios, grey versus green, different options for green scenarios, and to assess, and it gives you an output, it gives you the value that you can obtain for those different ecosystem services. Sometimes that's economically, where that's possible. Sometimes that it's quantified, and sometimes it's more qualitative in terms of social ecosystem services. But it does allow you to go across that range. It's a decision support tool. So the idea is that you can put your potential projects into that tool, and you can use the results as evidence to support investment in those projects. It can also be used at the design phase to enhance your projects. You can look at the water retention levels your project will deliver, or the biodiversity enhancements you will gain, and you can tweak it to deliver more value for those potential priority ecosystem services. So it's also a tool to kind of get people thinking about different ecosystem services, look at the co-benefits and how they can enhance them from their projects. But it's really great to see that you've reviewed the different pilots. You could also use our tool to look at your pilots and see what the results are. I mean, when we developed the tool, we also did extensive review of all the existing tools and looked at the limitations with them in terms of providing data for urban blue-green infrastructure projects. And we also interviewed a lot of local authorities. I think some that might be sitting in this room, maybe some of your colleagues took part in our interviews. So we really hope that it's a tool that maybe some of you might be interested in using, and we hope it's useful. And we'd love to, I think, test it in the more of a coastal environment. The University of Antwerp and University of Ghent, who developed it, after the project, they've taken on responsibility to maintain the tool and update it going forward, and they're looking at ways to enhance it, new projects, etc. So we'd love to hear more from SARCC on its potential use.
Brilliant. Yeah, thanks for that input, and I'm sure we can set up some communication and links during the breaks to continue that collaboration. So I think this actually brings up, and some of your answers as well have done, the issue of data and where does the data come from? How do we deal with data gaps? Flavia mentioned in her presentation that a lot of the monitoring of the pilots hasn't quite yet been finished, so there's a lot of conclusions we can't really make. And Hannah, you also talked about a lot of data capture. Once you've selected your models to use, then it was still a very extensive data collection exercise. So how do we bridge those data gaps, and how can we apply these methods on the coastline as a whole, rather than just very specifically to each pilot? I guess it's almost like, how do we mainstream this approach so it's applicable elsewhere as well? Do you want to start, Flavia? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, in my opinion, I think a good way to gather this data is to go back to these pilots, and after 1 or 2 years, once they have the empirical data from their monitoring, to send similar questions back and ask them to provide this data.
Mm-hmm.
So from our perspective with the longue durée, the questions we've asked of the data, I think we can find the data wherever we're looking. And I should actually point out, in relation to the earlier question about the art, I should say that when the analysis of the different disciplines, of be it the art or the archaeology or the heritage, we did work over 10 years ago to put those questions together by working with coastal managers and working with art historians and archaeologists in various countries around Europe to actually devise these different questions. Now, so the questioning is there. The data isn't necessarily missing if we look for it, but it's only within the pilots, which is the point. Now, how we mainstream it, I suppose, is to get people to recognise the value of all the work we've been doing and to apply it to future developments. And it would be good to have another Interreg project, take it forward, to expand it across many different areas, many different districts. But unfortunately, we had this Brexit thing going on. So it's all been a bit compromised for us, but it's not to say that it can't be continued by our partners on the continent.
From the perspective of the ecosystem services, yeah, there are definitely many gaps, but we try to complete those gaps with the proxies that I explained. So for each kind of type of data that you're looking for, you can find in so many literature, for example, a formula that fits the data that you're looking for, or it is not exactly what you're looking for, but you can use it to try to give a value to it. So in that sense, it's always an estimation ecosystem services. It's not a one-on-one relationship. So we try to solve it in that way. Yeah. And another thing is that we also still need to communicate with other projects, like the tool that was mentioned. I know of the tool. Yeah, but the thing is with projects, yeah, you need to talk to each other, and then you know the data that someone else has, and then you can join everything together. So it's really a matter of communicating with other researchers, because research is never done. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to add something?
Well, I think that especially in urban development, the main point is that the data is of a very different nature if you look across all sectors, and that also it needs to be transformed into information to be able to discuss them about this. So yeah, this is what interdisciplinary design methodology is about. How can you really understand and translate data from different people in steps? And it means that you really have to have a sort of orchestration on data. So it needs to be not too detailed in the first step, and then you go into the resolution. So I think that data management is also really about the orchestration of data. And for us in doing the work for Vlissingen and Southend on Sea, is that you see that, which is very interesting, is that hydraulic engineering also takes a lot of assumptions. And then they think we are the softies. And I'm thinking, yeah, but you are also, well, you somehow have your hard data numbers, and we have our fuzzy data. But in the end, they also take a lot of assumptions. So I felt that's really a topic I would really like to dive into deeper. And that they worked with a Delft 3D model for Vlissingen, and that is already on the base of a lot of. That's very easy. It's basically very available. This was not the case for Southend on Sea. That was one big pain. We never got the data actually, because someone owns it, and they just never gave it.
Okay. Yeah, this kind of notion of collaboration keeps coming up, and sharing information. So I think that's one of the main learnings of this whole conference. Really, is talk to each other and share. There's been quite a few questions about the ecosystem services in more detail. Quite a few people are wondering about, for example, the house prices, which have been mentioned already yesterday. So you've done some modeling which has predicted a certain increase in house prices. How does that correspond to the values that were presented yesterday in the pilot presentation of Middelkerke, for example?
They match. Yeah.
They match.
Yeah,
Oh, that's good.
I was not aware of the data of Steen until yesterday, so I wrote it down, and it's really a match. So that's a good thing. Yeah. But the thing is, I didn't know exactly which scale he used. Is it for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years that he calculated? But we did it for 1 year and also for 10 years. And yeah, I think there's a line in there that it's a match. Yeah. So that's
Brilliant.
good news. Yeah, that's a bit validated then. Yeah.
And someone else is wondering also, you mentioned in your presentation reduced mortality. How was that measured?
Exercise. So people, when somebody cycles or walks more, then you have a formula that's linked to that proves that you're healthier, and so you live longer. So that was the key formula in the tool we used. Yeah.
Okay. I'll move over to the pilot paradox, which Flavia explained brilliantly. How do we move from pilot scale trials to large commercial scale studies and deployment of NBS? So you obviously mentioned that from the SARCC project so far, it seems that pilot paradox doesn't necessarily apply, that those projects can be scaled up and they can be successful externally as well. But what is the next step following the studies that we've done within SARCC?
Well, I think Middelkerke is quite a good example of that it is possible to scale up and mainstream from a pilot to a larger area. It takes a bit more time. So across all the pilots, we saw that they face some inflexibility from the legal perspective when getting the permits. but they were able to go over these barriers by taking more time, and finally they got the permit. So I think it is possible if you engage with the right organizations in the right time that have the competence in coastal management and in taking the decisions.
Thank you.
And also gathering the right scientific data that really proves that nature-based solutions work. So a combination of factors. What was relevant in SARCC was that most of the pilot managers mentioned that when the local communities were on board, then the mayor was also convinced. So these two things went hand in hand, and once the mayors were convinced, then it was really easy to go forward from there and get all the permits.
Mm-hmm. Gary, do you want to add something?
Yes, and just building on that and building on the earlier discussion really about where next. I think this has been, we've dealt with pilots, but it's been a pilot initiative. I mean, this is really just a demonstration of what can be done. A lot of the work with the knowledge partners was conducted after permissions had already been granted for many of the developments. So they were already underway. Was a lot of work that knowledge partners should do is really should be applied at the beginning when the sites are being conceived, the ideas are being conceived, to help inform the decision-making process around the development of a sort of coastal defence or coastal development. So that would be the next phase as well, to really say, now bring this to the beginning of the project and not the whole lot. So to use this wonderful SARCC project as an example that we can build on for further developments in the future.
Thank you. So there was a lot of comments about the value of these solutions. What about cost? Has there been a cost-benefit analysis carried out on all of the pilots? Has that been compared against the maybe obvious value, but also the proxy value that for example, ecosystem services have measured?
Yes, we got some data from the pilot managers about how much they needed to spend to implement nature-based solutions. So that's also one of the formulas. Yeah, again, formulas and proxies. Yeah, it's included definitely. Yeah, and then you can see how much you gain, your value minus the costs. Yeah.
Okay. There was another question, well actually a few, which are all about access to information. And it's good to see that some local municipalities are saying this is all great stuff, but we're a small municipality. How do we keep an overview? How do we access all this information? What would your message be to little towns or even villages somewhere on the coast that are very new to the whole concept of nature-based solutions and perhaps don't have as many resources to kind of keep track of these, such as one of the larger cities like Vlissingen or Southend, who have a much bigger team of engineers who are already used to working with this kind of information. Fransje?
Well, I guess that Vlissingen is also, I mean, I live in Rotterdam. If you look at the engineering office of Rotterdam is 500. In Vlissingen, I don't know, 20, yeah. So I would say that in this project that all the Southend is actually quite big then are small scale municipalities that because I think especially for Vlissingen the reason also to ask the TU Delft is because they needed resources to be able to explore this other approach, and our Rijkswaterstaat and the Water Board would not support this because this is not what they do. They build dikes. So I think in that sense, for smaller villages to participate in these kind of projects is something that could be really helpful. And another thing is that what you see in the Netherlands, and this is not common within this topic, I think, is that a lot of regional municipalities cooperate on certain topics. So we, for example, have like an historical, say the monument care. That's a very Dutch translation. Care for monuments is done in big municipalities by, well, a department in the municipality. But for smaller municipalities, they usually have a regional body that does that for all these small. So in that sense, I would say that for this topic, it would be quite good for smaller municipalities to team up with others, and in that sense, share and cooperate in this.
I want to add something. I think the engagement is the most important part of getting smaller communities, smaller villages into this story. So that's why in SARCC we did the engagement work package 2. It's button up. If you can convince the people that live nearby a nature-based solution, then the message keeps on spreading, and then you reach the local authorities, how small they are, you can reach them. If you are really convinced of your opinion that nature-based solutions are a good way for protection. So it's really, I think, a bottom-up story. And then if you have the local authorities who agree with you, and I think you can rise, and then you can convince as well the bigger ones to join up and to make a great nature-based solution.
Gary?
I think I'd just also add that it's, I suppose it's a matter of expediency. Whatever size of an authority you have, if they are tasked with sort of protecting part of their landscape or their coastline, effectively, nature-based solutions are better and cheaper. So there's going to be a gain there, whatever size they look at. So there will be a cost saving. So once you can get that message across, well, then you're on a winner.
Brilliant. Any final remarks from the room? No, so we have reached the end of our slot for the panelists. I would like to thank all of you for your contribution. And someone online has also said, exceptionally well done to everyone from the Netherlands and Belgium. Their standard of English is fantastic. And we do appreciate that. So a round of applause for our panelists, please. And now, the coffee or tea break. Feel free to vote. And we'll be back in about 15 minutes to hear about some future projects and about the movements towards greater changes in policy from a couple external speakers that we have invited. So, oh, it's interesting. Tea is winning at the moment. We are in Britain, after all. So yes, see you in 15 minutes. Thank you.
I'm just having a look at the platform. Ooh.
Can I ask everyone to slowly take their seats, please? We will be starting in about a minute. Okay, so we're now going to move on to the next session. We're going to hear about a really exciting project called Making Space for Sand from our colleagues all the way from Cornwall. So first up is going to be the ginger Superman of Julian Sharp, who's going to tell us a little bit about this project, and he's going to then be followed up by his colleague Kat. And we will be taking some questions at the end, so if you want to ask anything, just make a mental note of it and ask at the end. So over to you, Julian.
Well, hello one and all. Thank you for having me here. It's an absolute pleasure. Really enjoyed the last few days. I'm going to be giving a very short presentation. I've got a whip being cracked at me to make sure I don't ramble on too much about the project Making Space for Sand, and Kat's going to be coming up on stage in about 5 minutes. 5 minutes, definitely. 10 minutes. To talk about the scientific learning element of it. So the name of the project, Making Space for Sand. The full name of the project, I need to, big inhalation, is Building Community Resilience on a Dynamic Coast by Making Space for Sand. So it doesn't really roll off the tongue particularly well, which is why we call it Making Space for Sand. We also call it MS4S because, you know, we love a good acronym, don't we? So, next slide. So yeah, content of the presentation, a little bit of an introduction to FCRIP, another acronym, an overview of MS4S, and then Kat's going to lead on the really exciting scientific learning and innovation that we'll be hopefully facilitating through the project. So first things first is an introduction to FCRIP. What is FCRIP? FCRIP is a Flood and Coastal Resilience Innovation Programme. It's DEFRA funded. Environment Agency managed. It's £150 million, which has to be spent by 2027 on 25 projects. And you can see there on the left-hand side of the image a map of where the projects are being delivered. They all have different themes, and you can see our one way down in Cornwall is a coastal theme. It doesn't mean that's all we're focused on. Of course, we'll be looking at working with communities as well within that. And the next presentation, of course, is on the map as a coastal project, but also considers catchments. So the projects are often more complicated than this image shows. Each of the projects will deliver a number of resilience actions, which you can see in the boxes on the right. There are actually 10 resilience actions. The one that isn't listed here is the influencing policy through the actions you can see there. So I think this is a real recognition that we're moving from a grey approach to a more green approach. It's about trial, learning through doing. It's about innovation and resilience and adaptation instead of a great big wall. So it's a big shift, and it's about learning from that process. I think it's also really important to say that the FCRIP is a bit of a family. I'm sure you've all worked with one another with your distinct projects, but the FCRIP project team are ensuring that we're all collaborating with one another, learning from one another's successes and failures, and that's really quite important. So an overview of the Making Space for Sound project. This is a very wordy slide for which I apologise, but the aim of the project is to have a more sustainable coastal fringe. And I think when we talk about sustainability, we're talking about it in its holistic sense. So we're thinking about making sure we've got sustainable socio-economic, environmental factors on the coastline. And, you know, it's incredibly important for a place like Cornwall. We recognise that because tourism is key. And people come to Cornwall for the quality of the environment. So it's very important we get that balance right. Data is incredibly important. We need to gather an awful lot of information so we can understand what processes are impacting on our coastline and what it will look like if we do nothing. So the data we're collecting is going to be on geomorphology, so morphology of our coastline, how it's going to change. I won't talk too much about that. Kat's going to lead in with that in a minute. We'll be learning about the health and the resilience, robustness of our dune systems. And we'll be using all of that data to work with communities and empower communities to help us make a positive change to those environments, and also help them build, adapt and become resilient. Because in some instances, these changes are going to occur and we're not going to be able to stop it. You know, it's very difficult to stop sea level rise and global climate change. Therefore, we are going to have to, in some places, become resilient to those forces. I think it's really important we're going to work with community groups. It's a bottom-up. Everything that's been said previously, it kind of makes my heart sing. We've got to involve community. It's a bottom-up approach. They've got to be part of that solution. So we've got to work with those community groups, and we've got to work with the landowners to realise outcomes from the project. And what we'd like on a few sites, like with the SARCC project and your pilots, was that we want to have 1 or 2, maybe 3 locations where we can have a big win, but also lots of locations where we can have little wins, because celebrating those and promoting those is really positive from a community perspective. So who is MS4S? Well, it's everyone actually in Cornwall, including the visitors, but it's being led by the partnership. So you've got Cornwall Council, we're leading the project, and we'll coordinate interventions if we can, where we can, develop exhibition spaces, mobile exhibitions. We'll be working with a great bunch of partners who are experts in their own field. From the PCO, Plymouth Coastal Observatory, they'll be delivering, I mean, I don't talk about it, I wish I had more time to talk about all of them, but they're delivering a great project called CoastSnap. It's a community science programme where you can take fixed point photography of a number of points of the coastline so you can monitor changes over various timescales. They'll also be adding to their incredible database. They've got 16 years of data. They're going to be adding to that and adding good quality data to that, which can then be used by the University of Plymouth, who are going to be doing some fantastic modelling of what change will look like. Again, Kat will add to that in a moment. Cornwall Wildlife Trust, a leading authority in environmental protection and environmental monitoring. So we'll be gathering baseline data, looking at biodiversity net gain, so we can see what improvements we're making to the environment through the project and after the project. And importantly, they're a great mechanism to enthuse the communities to help do their part. And last but not least, you've got Cornwall Community Flood Forum. Again, it's about getting that message out there to the public about how we can become more resilient and how we can adapt, and they will help be the mouthpiece to achieve that. So where's the project being delivered? So Cornwall is that little nub at the end. I call it a little nub. It's a massive peninsula, 700 kilometres long. Just so you can get a bit of a scale of how long that is, it's the equivalent of about 325 of the pleasure piers you can see out of the window. So it's an incredibly long stretch of coastline and an incredibly dynamic stretch of coastline. We have, the calmer southern coast, but, just 2 weeks ago, 20 foot of swell rolling in on the north coast. So we've got an incredibly dynamic landscape. Not many very large urban centres on the coastlines. We don't have lots of very long urban structures like you have here in Southend and Sea, and like many of the examples that we've been seeing in previous presentations in your coastal cities. But we do have over 300 beaches and dispersed rural populations within that. And I would talk about populations. It's a population that grows massively in the summer months when everybody comes to enjoy probably the best beaches in the world, in my opinion. So yeah, great coastline and a huge amount of pressure on those seasonally. But we've got, within all of the locations, we've got 40 project sites, and all of those locations are dynamic, very varied locations, from wide bays to elongated shorelines and coves. We've got associated with many of these locations very unique communities, and some of the beaches have incredibly complicated land ownership. Some sites have 7 or 8 landowners, so all of these things will present a challenge, and I think, again, it's been raised several times already that you've got to think about all of these factors when working with the communities. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. So an example of some of the outcomes, leading in on the images on the left, the EA led on a great project in one location called the Bude Adaptive Pathway Project, where they created some great visualizations of what coastal change would look like if we don't do anything. We're going to be expanding on that and developing more visualizations, and I think what I really want to develop is the sand dune time machine. Not a real one, of course, but something where you can look back to see where we've come from so that we can use that to see what we need to do in the future. So maybe a DeLorean, maybe a VW van. I'm not sure. It's going to have a flux capacitor, whatever we do. But it's a really good way of getting people to understand that actually the coastline was different before we developed it. And actually, in some instances, we're seeing new erosive processes, but actually sometimes it's the reclaiming of what we've developed. But, so I'm very much in agreement with a lot of what I've heard, using the history to indicate that things are changing. We'll also be looking at having exhibition spaces, so we'll be creating some space at Heartlands, which is down at Poole, where we'll be joining the Southwest Climate Change Centre, where there's great information on Forest for Cornwall, carbon neutral Cornwall, flood resilience. So we've got loads of projects. We're all coming together to share a space where we can educate the public, and of course we'll take the time machine on a road tour as well and educate communities. Baselining is key. We're going to be collecting lots of information on the ecological health of the dunes. So we need to start with where we are now, so that we know what we need to do to go to the future with outcomes. And I think most importantly, I've put some images in the lower right-hand corner of some of the various groups we want to work with. We've got to work with champions. The beaches are used by the community. We need to make sure that we're working with the community to deliver outcomes, and this is a great way of doing it. Finally, we haven't actually decided on what we're going to do yet and where we're going to do it, because we need to be engaging with the public first. But just a couple of very quick examples of some of the interventions we could consider. On the image on the left, you can see a car park. One part of it's very low lying. We could allow that to naturalise to become a dune system and move the car park to more resilient geology in a nearby area, thereby making space for sand. And in the image on the right, you can see there's a community that suffers from fluvial flooding and also from tidal surges. So there may be a need at locations like this to close the beach car park, move some of the community infrastructure to more resilient locations, and work with that community about how they can become more resilient to flood events. So that's just a couple of things that we could do. But like I said, we first need to work with those communities to see what they would like to see at the locations. They're very much part of the process. So I'm going to end my part of the presentation for now and hand over to Kat for the next bit.
Thank you, Julian. Let me start by saying that Gert Masselink is academic lead for Plymouth University on this project. I'm project manager, and the team also includes another 5 academics and researchers and 2 PhD students who will also be working on this project. Now, I would believe that all of you in this audience have a good appreciation of how important dune systems are, both in terms of their coastal protection and from an ecological perspective. Hence, we've been listening to all the work that's been going on over the past 4 years. So, as such, they've been studying quite extensively, and we now do understand quite a lot about how they develop and what the primary drivers of change are at the different timescales. So we know, for example, that sea level rise is a key driver in long-term change, and we know that storm waves drive changes at the timescales of hours to days. So why do we need to put more research into the dune systems? Well, to begin with, we still don't understand a lot about change in the mesoscale. But also, importantly, a recent study led by Hert Maslink that focused on a subset of the making space for sand sites found that most of them have been receding over the past 15 years. And they also found that the changes in the dune foot position that you can see at the top plot here were decoupled from changes in beach volume that you can see at the bottom plot. Now, this is quite interesting because we generally associate erosion in the front of the dune with a lowering of beach or dune volume. Now, what we found in this study was that although this typical behavior did occur in those 2 instances highlighted in the red box, where we had the dunes propagating and at the same time increasing in volume shown at the top, or the dunes receding and reducing volume shown at the bottom plot in that red box. In most cases, we had erosion and accretion happening at the same time. So what was really happening, it seems, is that sediment from the front of your dune is eroding, but it's then being deposited at the top of the dune. Essentially, the dunes want to roll back. And this is a natural process, and it is nature's way of taking care of itself. And if the dune does have the space to move back, it will maintain its flood protection, it can still act as a buffer against erosion, and it can still support those habitats that are so important for biodiversity and nature conservation. But it does pose significant challenges for existing infrastructure, and that has kept you guys busy for the past 4 years. Another very unique characteristic of the Cornish dune systems is that they are very diverse. So we have a lot of climbing or perch dunes that have been inherited from a previous age but are now completely disconnected from the beach and the sea. We have a lot of dune scarps that kind of inhibit the transport of sediment from the beach to the dune, as we generally perceive that we need to have at least a ramp to facilitate that. And a lot of our intertidal areas are very saturated, so again, that inhibits the transport of sand to the dunes. So we need to understand more how those very different dune systems will respond to sea level rise and to potential changes in storminess in the future. So how do we do that? Well, potentially the most widely used and a very simple approach is what's termed the Bruin rule. Now, this is essentially an equilibrium-based approach, and the underlying premise is that the active beach profile is in equilibrium with incoming wave conditions, so it will maintain its shape as sea level rises. To do this, it will also rise with the sea level, but it will then need to recede backwards to maintain, to conserve the mass of the sediment. Now, this is a very simplified approach, and one of the underlying assumptions here is that there is infinite supply of sediment beneath that active profile. Now, as we've seen in Cornwall, most of our dune systems are just perched on top of our underlying rock. So this assumption certainly doesn't hold. So Jack McCarroll and some of our colleagues from the Coastal Processes Research Group developed this model. It's called short trans, and they called it a rules-based model. It is, again, an equilibrium model that can consider substrates in its development. And what they found when they applied it to beaches was that actually the limitation of sediment means that the active profile needs to move even further back to conserve that mass. So essentially, limited sediment needs to exacerbate its erosion. Now, both of these models are very simple. They can be easily applied over wide spatial scales and across time scales, but they completely disregard the most important processes involved in dune evolution. And those that are particularly relevant to the Making Space for Sand projects are those constructive processes that lead to dune rollover. And those are primarily, or perhaps the most important of those, is wind-driven processes. So if we look a little bit at that, and considering the 355 days during which theoretically we have potential for wind-driven sediments, well, actually, let's take out those days where the wind isn't strong enough or it's coming from the wrong direction, so it's not actually moving sediment from the beach onto the dunes. We kind of realize that we're left with less than half of those. And then if we remove those days where the tide is too high, so the beach is too narrow, so there's not enough space to get that sediment mobilized, or it's been raining, or there's too high a run-up because the waves are too energetic, at the end of the day, the potential for wind-driven sediment is quite small. Now, all of these processes are very site-specific, but the bottom line really is that there are many processes involved. There are many models that can replicate those processes, but there isn't one at the moment that can include all of these processes across different timescales. So how are we going to approach this? Well, we're going to have a layered, so to speak, approach. So as a first pass, we will apply Brunelud modeling across all of our sites, and this is actually being done at the minute already. Further along the line, when we have a little more information about sediment thickness over the rock, we will also run short trans, again, across all of our sites. But then we will have to focus on a small number of them, 5 or 6 of them, and develop a new model that will include all the relevant processes like waves, tides, wind, sediment characteristics, moisture characteristics, to see how those dunes will actually develop in the long term, including all important processes. Now, of course, all the modeling is very demanding in terms of data, and we've heard everyone talking about how important data is. So we at the University of Plymouth, together with the Plymouth Coastal Observatory, will be collecting a lot of data. And this is just an example of how much data and what the types of data that we will be collecting throughout the project. Now, through this project, we will gain a unique understanding of how those very different dune systems will respond to sea level rise and to forcing. And that will help us raise awareness as to the physical impacts of sea level rise on dune systems, and that will also help us identify and pursue sustainable adaptation options that are both effective and acceptable by the public. And with that, I will thank you and leave you with Jolion's favourite quote.
Yes, it is. I had developed another presentation which was Star Wars themed, and unfortunately I was told that I couldn't do it. So not by you guys, but anyway, it's a great saying from Cyril Khan and/or Series 1, Episode 2. There comes a time when the risk of doing nothing becomes the greatest risk of all. And I think that's where we are with this. We need to have the conversations now. We need to be working with communities now, because if we don't, the challenges we face in the future will be far more significant. So it's always nice to lean on Star Wars for something that will inspire you. So very closing slide and a nod to Star Wars has to be done. So thank you very much for listening to us and for having us here. It's been a really great conference, really enjoyed it, and thank you to all the speakers thus far. It's been brilliant and worth attending. So thank you.
Thanks both of you for some amazing insights. So I think we have time for about maybe 1 or 2 questions. If anyone wants to query some of the things Do we have any questions online, maybe? We do.
There's a couple online that relate to each other, considering generating genes where there possibly wouldn't be them naturally or there aren't any there currently. How is that approached? Do you consider artificial means of generating those sand dunes, or is the focus mostly on natural processes?
Do you want to?
In the majority of instances, we're looking to expand on where there are already dune systems or have historically been dune systems. I don't think we're going to be in a situation where we're looking to develop systems where there currently aren't any. So again, that links back to the historical use of locations. In many instances where we have development, there were dunes. So the coastline is effectively, or the coast is taking it back. So, but yeah, we'll be looking to work with natural processes where there are already natural processes.
We have a last one as well. What are the current challenges for encouraging the adoption of more sustainable practices regarding sand gene maintenance and regeneration?
I didn't provide the slide on challenges, but I think there's multiple challenges in that regard. I think I mentioned a few, but you need to have community support. They need to be engaged with that. And I think there needs to be an educational package associated with that. You know, the dunes are often seen as a bit of an extension of the playground of the beach, so there needs to be some strong messaging, which is why the champions are important. You need to have, of course, the landowners on board. There are some examples with some of the dune systems where they're owned by 7 or 8 people, and you need all of those parties to be involved in a solution. And sometimes the drivers aren't environmental. It might be that their ownership is one that's more economically focused. I think a real challenge as well is the short-termism that you might face as well, in that the benefits we get from the coastline now might be seen as more important as the long-term objectives of maintaining something into the future. And I think as well you've got to look at the various challenges we have right now as a nation, you know, with inflation, cost of living, and I think that sometimes can act as it can take away the focus of that longer-term need to do something. So there's going to be numerous challenges, and I think that what we are going to need to do as a project is focus on those locations and work with those people that want to work with us. We have to ensure that we've got some good pilots, and then hopefully from those pilots bring more people round the table to talk about what we can do. I hope that kind of helps answer.
Brilliant, thanks very much.
Yeah, thanks, Julian and Kat. As both of you being our external speakers, we do have a little gift bag for you. I'm sure you've been looking forward to it. So I'll ask Isaac to bring that across, and enjoy the final talk. And I'm sure you'll have a great time chatting to everyone at lunch later. So thanks again for both of you. So now we're getting to our closing talk, and it's going to be given by Joe Matthews, who you've heard from a little bit already yesterday. It's about the future of policy, at least on the UK scale, but I'm sure there's many lessons we can apply to other countries as well. So this is a talk that, just like the previous one, is focusing on the things coming. So do take notes. We will be sharing the presentations later as well, and all the contact details. And if you just think of any questions, we'll do a quick Q&A at the end of it. But I'll hand over to Joe to start, and then Tom is going to also do a section of it, as I understand. So brilliant. Over to you, Joe. Okay.
Didn't get the memo. So thank you, everyone. So for those of you who weren't here yesterday, my name is Jo Matthews. I'm the Principal Engineer in the Civil Engineering team at Southend on CCT Council. And this is Tom Palmer, who is one of the senior engineers within the team. So, right, see if I can get to the first slide. There we go. Right, so future of nature-based solutions. So we've spoken a lot really over the last few days about how we're going to mainstream nature-based solutions, what's the drivers, how's it going to happen, obviously for me, primarily in the UK. So I think, firstly, there's two misconceptions. I think after listening to some of the talks and some of the feedback I've heard over the last few days, I think there's a misconception that hard engineering and concrete is the preferred option for the UK. And I have to say, obviously, where I have, the work I have done and the people I've worked with and my colleagues, that's not my experience at all. I don't find that to be the common practice at all. And I saw a statement yesterday, which I thought was really, really good, which basically said soft nature-based solutions where possible, hard engineering defences wherever necessary. I don't know whose slide that was, but I thought that was absolutely spot on. And that is basically what we're going to be talking about today and the project and the work that we are doing in the UK. So I'm just going to get this to whiz down a bit. Right, so again, if you think back to Amy's presentation yesterday with her Pearl approach, I mean, it was quite, it's a very good demonstration of what is happening in the UK at the moment, coming from national strategy, and it's an approach that Southend City Council are taking through the Catchment to Coast project, which we're going to talk about in a little bit later as we move forwards. Basically, the two key documents on the screen, the strategy and the policy statement, those are really the key documents in the UK that are going to bring about this change, a change that we all want and we all want to see. Basically, the strategy kind of sets out the government's commitment, really, I suppose, to reform flood and coastal erosion risk management in the UK, and it kind of sets out the pathway for how we can look to change the funding mechanisms and also the measures that are acceptable as we go forwards. The strategy also sets out the government's kind of realisation, I think, the recognition that one approach doesn't fit all, and that the coastal zone or the flooding areas, it's all very dynamic and it's very changing. It's not a static process. And there is the need now to start incorporating nature-based solutions, to look at enhancing innovation measures and to basically make us a more resilient nation. So on the screen there, I've just quickly taken a snapshot of the three key ambitions from the strategy. I'm not going to read it out, obviously, in full. If you want to go to the strategy, it's in there. And basically, the approach is to make, as it says there, helping communities at risk of flooding and coastal change to respond, recover and adapt in a changing climate. So that's the key message from the strategy. Before we go into FCRIP, I just wanted to give a little bit more background. So across the UK at the moment, DEFRA is funding a series of flood and coastal erosion innovation programmes. I'm not sure that everyone is aware of that, and in case it comes back to my comment about the beware the interreg bubble yesterday. So at present time, there are three key demonstration programmes running. So FCRIP, the Flood and Coastal Resilience Innovation Programme, which we're going to talk about in a minute. There's also CTAP, which is the Coastal Acceleration Transition Programme, and also the Adapted Pathways Programme. Now, all that information is being gathered through demonstration projects, and that information is going to go back to DEFRA, and that is going to be used to inform our strategies and our future approach to flood and coastal risk management going forwards. And we also spoke as well yesterday about where is all this data, how can people collaborate, where can people find it? Well, the EA has actually set up the Engagement HQ, the Engagement Hub. So all of the information from these programmes, which are going to basically take forward our future policy, is there. It's open to the public, so you can go in there, you can see what's happening, you can follow the programmes, you can join the conversation. So I think there is that big recognition in the UK that this is the way forward, this is the way we need to move. So FGRIP, the Flood and Coastal Resilience Programme, obviously we've just heard from Cornwall explaining a bit about it, so I'm not going to really go through the principles, but it's basically the government's commitment to delivering what is set out in the actual statement. Sorry, God, me and IT, I'm terrible, aren't I? So, as Cornwall said, there's 25 projects within FCRIP. Catchment to Coast is just one of them. And Tom's going to speak about that in a bit more detail for you as well shortly. Hang on, wrong slide. There we go. So, as we said there, the whole point of doing these programmes is that DEFRA wants any future strategy to be data-led. So lots of people have been doing various different kind of nature-based solutions, but what they want to make sure is that any future change is based on solid evidence and there's no gaps in the understanding, and that is why these programmes have been set up, and that is where the information will go to the ministers. It will be considered, and then DEFRA will then decide the future of flood and coastal erosion management in the UK, whether that's what measures will be acceptable, what will be funded, etc., etc. So a quick slide here, just demonstrating some of the issues we obviously have in the Southend area. When we talk about flood and coastal erosion risk management, we talk about the whole catchment. So whilst we're looking at the coast, we're also looking at what happens inland too. We're looking at the whole hydraulic catchment and that interaction with the coastal zone. So, catchment to coast. Why did Southend City Council and the other 11 partners get together and create an application to undertake this project, catchment to coast? As we all know, across the world and also in Southend and Thurrock, we're experiencing a lot more frequent and what we call multi-source flooding events. So, in Southend, for example, we have a lot of flooding, but it's not normally from one receptor. If we have flooding, it's because of heavy rainfall. There is normally the interaction from an overcharged utilities network, from a river being banked full, and also we have the lucky joy of having the tide and becoming tide locked as well. So when we're talking about the future of kind of management of these issues, we have to look at that as a catchment approach. So we're moving away from looking at these issues in isolation. The other reason we've put the project together is because obviously currently funding arrangements for the UK doesn't fit with Southend, and it also doesn't fit with Thurrock. We have a lot of our flooding and our erosion areas. They're quite scattered locations. They don't traditionally attract funding. As we all know, it's how many houses can you move from out of one property, risk of flooding to another. In Southend, as you drove around yesterday, you'll see quite a lot of our houses are pushed right back from our foreshore. So behind our defences, we have utilities, we have major networks, we have railway lines, all those kind of things that when you're applying for grant funding, you don't get anything. So that's always the position we have been in. And when we're thinking about the coastal zone as well, we've also there's a legacy in the UK of historic landfill sites. So where you went yesterday to Two Tree Island, that is one of them. So behind the nature reserve at the front, there is also a historic landfill. And again, nobody lives there. There's no major infrastructure. Not anything that's going to attract partnership funding. So these are kind of the projects when we apply for funding, they fall down the legs of the stool and we don't attract anything. So we were really keen to be involved in FCRIP because this is kind of the opportunity for us to be given funding for these actual sites and actually try and innovate and prove that we can, through different approaches and using innovation techniques, we can get benefits. And that is why we're really keen to be involved in the project, because this is our opportunity to demonstrate that nature-based solutions, regenerative agriculture, retrofitting of SUDs, all of these things which we wouldn't normally get money for, have got such great benefit that they should be considered in the future. So just a quick overview of the Catchment to Coast project. There's 12 key partners in the project. Southend and Thurrock are the lead partners. We've also got Castle Point, Rochford District Council, Anglian Water, the Environment Agency, Essex Wildlife Trust, Thames 2100, Ambiotech, and the two universities, King College London and University of Essex, and we're also supported technically by Mott MacDonald. So as you can see, there's a whole raft of people involved in this project. And I thought back to the presentation yesterday, actually, about the Frodo and the Ring and the Fellowship. And that's why we're all working together, because we have a vast amount of skills and knowledge and experience. And by tackling these problems that we commonly encounter together, we hope we should be much more successful at trying to address them. So the project objectives, I've just popped them there. Catchment to coast will take a strategic approach to flood and coastal erosion risk management. So what we mean by that is administrative boundaries don't matter. It's not Southend's water, it's not Essex County Council's water, it's everybody's water and it's everybody's problem. So that is why we've got a whole variety of local authorities working with us, which is really great, and it's actually, you know, it's already showing benefits, which is great. The project also is looking at the innovation of individual measures, but as I said, we're taking the catchment approach, so we're trying to understand what are those individual benefits and what is the collective benefits of them all across the catchment. And we're also monitoring to make sure one doesn't have a negative kind of impact on another measure. And the key to all this project really is innovation. So nature-based solutions will form part of that. They'll either form a part of that in isolation or they may form a part of that in a hybrid approach. So half nature, half grey infrastructure. And what we're aiming to get out of this at the end is basically a long-term strategic management approach for all of the water in the catchment and the erosion issues that we encounter. So I'll just skip on to the next one. So I'm going to hand over to Tom now, who's going to talk a little bit more about some of the sites. Sorry. So yeah, boy racer out there. So Tom's going to talk a little bit more about the locations and what we're planning to do. As Cornwall said, we haven't finalised quite a lot of this because we need to do a lot more engagement with people, but these are just the areas that we put into our expression of interest, common areas and common issues we want to basically resolve through the partnership.
Hopefully you can hear me. Thank you very much, Joe. So yeah, as Joe said, I'll go through the project in a bit more detail, give you a bit of a flavour for what we're doing and where we're doing it. So hopefully you can see from the map, get an idea of the spread of the projects across Thurrock, Southend, and then a bit of Essex in between as well. So you can see the pier, so we're right at the top of that at the moment, and then Two Tree Island where you went yesterday, so quite a big coverage there. So as Joe said, we're taking a catchment approach here. So looking at measures of the upper catchment, middle catchment and lower catchment. And I'll go through those in a bit more detail in a second. But the upper catchment is mostly the kind of the rural areas, and where we're looking at kind of things like regenerative agriculture, and we've got a bit more space to play with. The mid catchment is more SUDS-based, water storage and reuse and retrofit in the urban areas. And then obviously the coastal measures, which are linked to the coast or its close proximity. So we've got 16 sites across the whole area, and those are ones that have come forward as part of the work we've done so far. We've got many more kind of backup sites, so if you get problems with landowners or reasons, for whatever reason we can't take a site forward, we've got some kind of ready and waiting to progress. And one of the key things about all of these sites is the monitoring, which we touched on. That is the goal at the end of this, is to gather some data and some learning. So for every site, there will be very detailed, high-resolution modelling of various parameters, including water quality, flow rates and things like that, depending on the interventions we're looking to do. And the goal of the learning is to determine the individual kind of effectiveness of a specific measure at a site. Compare that, so similar measures at different sites in different catchments, and compare them and see how they kind of perform in the kind of different scenarios. And then kind of the catchment approach to see how collectively the measures all add together to reduce flood risk, coastal erosion, and other factors. And again, innovation, it's an innovation project, so we've tried to fit innovation into all of the measures, be that the specific measure that's being installed, the location it's being installed at might not have been tried before, or combination might not have been done before, or it might even be to do with the process. So there are some kind of locations where we're looking at doing less modelling and less work up front to allow us to get in and to deliver the measures and then kind of see what happens afterwards. So in the upper catchment, then these are the sites we've got. We're looking at, as I said, it's kind of the rural areas. So in Stamford-le-Hope, for example, we're looking at putting in some leaky dams and with some mycelium matting as well to work out the effects on flow reductions and also water quality from agricultural runoff. That obviously has a bigger consequence on the catchment and then ultimately the estuary itself in terms of algal growths and things like that. We're looking at spike aeration in the golf course to improve infiltration, again reduce the amount of water that's coming off the site and into the brook and take the pressure off in times of heavy rainfall events. And in Bolton in the corner up here, what we're going to do there is provide some tools and resources to a community to help them deliver their own flood scheme, which is going to be interesting, I think. So we're not actually going to pay for the works, we're going to support them to deliver the works and then take ownership of those going forwards. Then the mid-catchment, so as I said, is more the urban areas. So we're looking at kind of SUDS retrofit on some residential streets, also in some highway areas as well to take water off the road and off roofs and things and keep it out of the sewer network or hold it and then just release it using smart water butts sort of in times of less demand on the sewer network. We're also looking at allotments as well for community water storage and reuse, so taking water off the highway, treating it via SUDS, capturing it, storing it, allowing it to be used. And again, a big focus of this is kind of the drought side of things. We've seen this summer that water is a resource that we either have too much of or too little of, and that's how it's going forward. So we're trying to flatten that kind of curve a little bit as part of these projects. And another big kind of theme through all of this is the hydro citizenship and making people aware of water as a resource and kind of getting that buy-in so people can understand that a bit better, that it is a vital resource that they're probably going to have issues with going forward, well, more issues with going forward in terms of having too much or not enough. And then the coastal sides. So as Joe said, we're focusing on historic landfills. So Two Tree is a historic landfill site and Coal House is an actively eroding historic landfill site. If you go there, you can actually see it kind of falling into the Thames, which isn't very nice. So at those sites, we're looking to put in kind of nature-based solutions, but in combination. So some on the direct kind of frontage, some in the intertidal area, so using things like potato matting as part of a Natural England project, which is a biodegradable kind of structure that promotes salt marsh regeneration and then kind of deteriorates away. And then also things further out into the intertidal area, kind of like floating barrier islands. So getting some vegetation on there to kind of propagate some plants, using it as a natural solution to break up the wave energy as well. What else are we doing? So East Tilbury is a visual warning system we're putting in because they get a lot of tidal flooding there. And Benfleet Creek, we're looking to put some mycelium beds in to treat the water that is coming out of a sewage treatment works there. They've got a couple of CSOs, and we think that's probably a factor in the water quality going downstream to Two Tree Island, because there's a lot of algal growth there, which is almost stifling the salt marsh regeneration. So those two kind of link together a bit. Okay, so I'll just very quickly go on to where we are and what we've done so far. So again, monitoring is a very key part of this project. We started deploying a lot of weather stations, which you can see from the pictures, and then monitoring equipment in surface water sewers as well with Anglian Water. We're deploying flow meters very soon as well to help get that baseline data before we implement the monitoring. As well, we've got a dedicated comms and engagement officer coming in very shortly, so that's going to be a big factor as part of this, the engagement with people to allow us to deliver the measures and also the kind of the learning going forwards as well. And we've got a couple of PhD students as well, part of the project. There's one from each university, so they'll be coming soon, and their role will be to analyse the data and kind of help us with the learning side of things. And another thing of note we're doing is developing a kind of community hub, so people, it's really, again, promote that hydro citizenship, and it'll be a place for the data gathering as well, so in terms of the water, but usage and kind of that side of things. And we're hoping to kind of foster a bit of competition between different areas, I think, to really kind of get that engagement as well. So, and I think that's it. I'll pass back to you then for the last bits.
Right, okay, thanks Tom, that's great, yeah. So so as we said, we want healthy hydro citizenship. We don't want fighting in the streets. I've saved more water than you this month, so that's kind of the theme we're going for, but no vigilante behaviour. So just a couple of things really to finish off with the future. Well, as we said, that's the million-dollar question really, isn't it? I think the UK have got a great framework. They've recognised the need. DEFRA are really keen in supporting the change through FCRIP and obviously the other two innovation programmes as well. And kind of how will nature-based solutions be mainstreamed? Well, kind of two levels I was thinking about today. Southend, we've got a whole array of documents there, including the emerging new local plan for Southend. We've got our coastal strategy, we've got our local flood risk management strategy, and we've got the implementation plan. So when all of those were written, that was in advance of the new strategy. So whilst we were tinkering about with nature-based solutions, now obviously there's a much more greater emphasis on doing that, getting the evidence and putting it into strategies. So what we will do in the interim, whilst the national programmes and evidence gathering is ongoing, we're going to basically produce a kind of interim document. I know one of the outputs for SARCC was that we would demonstrate how we're going to integrate nature-based solutions into our policy. Well, with the FCRIP project, that's kind of overtaken SARCC. So we will be producing something in the interim, and then obviously when FCRIP is finished and the other programmes, we will then be in a position to integrate that kind of formally, I suppose. So just to finish off, really, just as I said, there was two misconceptions that I just wanted to get rid of. Basically, that there is a lot going on in terms of nature-based solutions across the UK. So please go on to Engagement HQ, have a look. There's a lot of work going on there. As we said, it's a 6-7 year programme. We're only a couple of 18 months into it, so it will be launched nationally very soon. But as I say, there's a lot of work going on, so please do have a look, do contact any of us if you want any more information. And just to finish on as well, yes, as an engineer, we do like concrete, we do like hard engineering, but you'll find nowadays the traditional engineer of the 1950s has gone, and we're very, very aware that we want to implement nature-based solutions and also improve habitats where we can. Thank you.
Thank you, both of you, for those comments and insights into the future of nature-based solutions policy in the UK. Hopefully, some of our partners from Belgium and the Netherlands and perhaps France and further afield online can take some inspiration and apply it elsewhere. We do have an opportunity to ask a question or two. Bert, can we have a microphone?
Yeah, I was quite intrigued about this catchment to coast approach. Yeah, it's very interesting. Is all the actions, is it led by Southend-on-Sea, or you talked about the bigger fellowship? Southend-on-Sea is the lead of the gang, but you don't own all the land areas. So how do you convince upstreams to collaborate for your downstream problems? What is the carrot that you have?
So yeah, we are leading with Thurrock as well, so they cover the majority of the sites. There are some bits in between that we don't own, but partners are heavily involved with, so there's an Anglia Mortar site in between as well. So, but yeah, landowner engagement is one of our kind of key priorities at the moment in getting them on board. As I said at the start of my little bit, we've got backup sites. So if for some reason a landowner isn't on board, or we reach a point where it's not financially viable, or it's very heavily not financially viable, we can swap that in to kind of keep that learning. We want a couple of sites per kind of measure we're looking into to implement and things like that, so we've got that good learning spread. So yeah, we've got backup options should they be needed, but engagement again is going to be key, as Cornwall said. Something we've got a lot of work to do on.
But can you convince them that they need to take actions for Southend being downstream? So it's they doing investments. It's a bit like the ecosystem approach. Like they need to do investments and they don't take a lot of value from it because it's preventing damage in Southend. So that's.
Yeah, so basically, again, going back to the strategy, there is a realisation higher up in the ministerial sector that we need to have a catchment approach. It's in there in black and white, we need to take that. So the whole part of Catchment to Coast through the hydro citizenship is taking people along on that journey. Now, as I said, it's very early days. We've done stakeholder mapping, we've had engagement with several key stakeholders, but not all. So the whole point of this innovation programme is, can it be done? and what lessons can be learned. So at the moment, we hope so. At the end of the programme, we'll know yes or no, because that's the whole point. You know, the whole point of having this funding is to try things. If it doesn't work, why didn't it work? What could be done differently? So we're not expecting all 25 projects through FCRIP to have fantastic 100% gold-plated outcomes. Again, it's about learning, and that information will then go back to DEFRA. They will analyse it, and they will decide if the strategy is going to be updated or the funding mechanism is going to be updated, what is going to be included in that. So it's going to be a lot of work, and as Tom said, we've got a dedicated comms and engagement manager starting with us very soon. So what we've been doing really over the past 18 months is getting all the background data. If you think back to the slide I said yesterday, make sure you get your science, make sure you get your engineering right. Look at all your data, what have you got, where are the gaps, what do you need to get. So that's what we've been doing really for the last 18 months, is getting that solid platform. So when we do come to do the review and the evaluation, we have really solid results that we can share.
Okay, looking forward to that.
Any more questions? Do we have any online as well? We do, okay. Thank you for engagement online, it's fantastic.
It's more of a quick comment, really, that it's nice to see projects like this outside of that Interreg bubble, as you called it. So I think there's a couple of people online wondering if these learnings can be shared across the channel as well.
Yes, absolutely. And as I said, with the Engagement HQ page is set up. That's, as we were saying earlier, that's run and managed by the EA. So as we go through the next few years, everything will be on there. So you will be able to keep track, follow, ask questions, and obviously share the learning there.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for your presentation, and another round of applause. There we go. Just like for Jolien and Kat, we do have a little goodie bag for both of you, so I'm sure you were looking forward to that. So Isaac can bring those across. This is bringing us to the end of the program. I hope that you've all found it inspiring and insightful. Maybe those are kind of keywords that you might want to use in a minute when I go back to Mentimeter. But I wanted to just summarize very briefly that the range of topics that we've covered is very broad, but it always comes back to that engagement, sharing of information, collaboration. I think they are the strongest messages of the conference so far, and I think everyone, well, there we go, we already have Mentimeter up, so everyone can think about those going forward, and hopefully some of the connections that we've made during the coffee breaks and during the lunches here and dinners are going to spur on to create new projects in the future. And for everyone online as well, we will be sharing all of our presentations on the SARCC website. We will be sharing contact details of our speakers. So I know there's quite a few questions that we didn't have time to answer. These will also be followed up, and we will aim to release an answer for all of those on our SARCC website as well, alongside with the entire recording of the live stream. So if you have missed some sections, or if you could only come for one of the days or two of the days, by all means go and listen to the other sessions and refer back to them, because there's a lot of information that has been presented over the last 3 days, and a lot of very valuable resources. It's great to see that people are already interacting on Mentimeter as well. There's just a few statements that I thought are quite interesting about nature-based solutions. It's good to see that most people seem to agree that they've learned some new information, so that's a great success for us. That's exactly what we wanted to do. And everyone seems to strongly agree that nature-based solutions are definitely to be used in the future projects. So again, fantastic there. Maybe just to close, because we got about 30 answers there, which is quite nice. I will just move to to one final Mentimeter. I promise this is the last one. If you could describe the conference in one word, what would it be? I think this would be just nice for our socials later, so I thought, you know, we can make a little word cloud together. Brilliant, insightful. Someone has taken that on. So, building on this positive energy, I would like to once again thank all of our speakers. I would like to thank our technical team from Norwich Live Streaming for making the whole thing incredibly smooth. I'm sure that everyone would agree that it's all run very well. We're only 10 minutes behind today as well, which is quite amazing. And I would like to thank everyone online for tuning in and for interacting so much, for engaging on Twitter, for all your questions. So I would like to close the live stream here. So thank you to all of you online for joining us, and goodbye.